Today, I'm going to be talking about transiting Saturn, transiting houses 7 through 12 of the natal birth chart. There are 12 houses in a natal birth chart, and part 1, I discussed transiting Saturn, transiting houses 1 through 6. So today, I'm going to start with talking about transiting Saturn through house 7. But before that, I just want to recap and talk about Saturn's cycle. Saturn takes 29.5 years to transit around a birth chart. It spends 2.5 years in a zodiac sign. And when it's transiting a house, the themes of Saturn come up in that particular arena of our lives. The key words for Saturn, to recap on that, are the material reality, boundaries, time, maturity, responsibility, work, structure, the aging process, the elderly, facing mortality. Saturn in the physical body rules our skeletal structure, our bones, our ligaments, and our joints. Now, Saturn can also be considered going through tests of karma in life, because we often face blockages, fear, repression, defensiveness, challenges to overcome that can seem very heavy and very weighty. The key is, with all Saturn transits, to take a slow and steady approach and strive to do better. Saturn is about what endures through time. It's where we work harder to establish security and stability, and hopefully we grow through the circumstances that we are going through. But Saturn is a very good planet because without Saturn, we don't have stability. Saturn also brings the stability that we need in this lifetime. We need to be practical. We need to have boundaries. We need to take our time with things. We need to have responsibility in this lifetime. So Saturn is not all bad. The other aspect of Saturn, many astrologers talk about, the test of karma, the law of cause and effect, the balancing of karma. But basically what that means, I personally believe, is if we've been not focusing and not structuring and defining our life in a responsible manner, sometimes the tests will come up and the obstacles will come up so we can redefine or restructure what we are doing, what we've been doing incorrectly. So it's calling us to step up and work harder and strive and do better. So starting with house 7, the 7th house is all about partnerships, marriage, all one-to-one significant partnerships, alliances, sometimes conflicts within partnerships, and legal matters within partnerships. So Saturn, leaving the 6th house of self-improvement, service, work routines, health routines, and duty, has now entered into the 7th house of relationships. So what can we expect? Well, when Saturn enters the 7th house, it's really a time of consolidation of our serious one-to-one relationships. It can be a commitment, it can be an engagement, it can be a marriage, but it can also be a separation or even a divorce, depending on other factors that are happening simultaneously in the birth chart, which includes looking at other transits and progressions and other astrological factors that would lend itself to that type of situation or circumstance. So during this time, there's a focused concentration on a marriage relationship is one example. There could be realizations about our needs within a marriage. Are they being met? Questions an individual may ask. Well, is my partner there for me in a steady, consistent manner? Do I feel like I'm being taken for granted? Does my relationship still feel authentic to me? It's basically a reality check in relationships. We're redefining ourselves within a relationship. It's time during a Saturn transit to the 7th house to gain a clear perspective within our relationships, and it may bring challenges to our identity within a partnership setting. It's a great time for marriage counseling if partners are trying to redefine their relationship. Usually one partner feels it more than the other, the partner who's having the Saturn transit. Now, it's also about one-to-one partnerships in business ventures. So this could be a time, because Saturn is all about, getting serious and taking time to commit. Often partnerships are created at this time, long-term business partnerships. The rate of divorce or separation, I don't know what the rate is with Saturn transiting the seventh house, but as I said earlier, there have to be other factors going on. Not Saturn alone transiting the seventh house will have this situation occur. But certainly we get serious about all our long-term commitments. So what are some examples of Saturn transiting the seventh house? I had a client who was terminated from their job several years ago, and they ended up going into a one-on-one partnership, a business venture, with a longtime childhood friend that they were still close with. I had another client who had transiting Saturn going through the seventh house while it was opposing several planets in her first house, which was very challenging at that time. And she also had other progressions, which are techniques an astrology uses to delineate a chart even further, that indicated potential divorce or separation. This client did indeed eventually get a divorce, and it took time. It was very frustrating. I spoke to this client on many occasions during that time, but the dust settled and their lives moved forward. And another example, I had a female client. Her husband had retired. She was getting ready to retire. Her husband he always wanted to be a farmer. He bought land in another state. She was still living locally, and she didn't share the same values of wanting to live on a farm and be a farmer's wife. So she went through a real identity crisis while Saturn was transiting her seventh house, and they ended up redefining the partnership where she would fly there part-time and then fly back and spend time where she was happier. So they found a middle ground where they could both enjoy their lives, adhere to their values while still staying married. Those are a few examples, but the key is this is a time where you put in the effort within all partnerships. Also, if you are in a particular vocation or business where you are seeing one-to-one clients, you get really serious about seeing these clients and preparing for these clients, and your workload may increase. You have more clients, or you may have to do more research or more, just a heavier concentration and focus on meeting with these one-to-one interactions. Okay, now the eighth house. The eighth house is a pretty fascinating house. The eighth house in Hellenistic astrology, ancient astrology, talks about the eighth house being shared resources, shared finances, managing other people's resources, death and rebirth, and transformation. Well, it's also more than that. Personally, with my experience reading charts with eighth house planets, it's about deep, intimate connections. Whereas the fifth house is about love affairs, the eighth house is really deep, soulful, intense, intimate connections with others. It's also about trauma, experiencing trauma, deep, deep peak experiences in life, growth and change, death and rebirth. It's also about the obvious eighth house financial matters, which are taxes, inheritances, legacies, trust funds, mortgages, all of that stuff. financial agreements of all kinds. So key words for the eighth house are, to recap, death and rebirth, financial, psychological, intimate, and spiritual transformation, trauma, and also past life or spiritual experiences. And I'll get to that in a few minutes. There's grief and loss often faced during an eighth house transit because the eighth house is death and rebirth. Maybe we're facing the loss of a loved one, or we're going through a serious illness ourselves and we're facing mortality. Often people become more interested in occult studies at this time. They may take up the study of astrology and other spiritual practices because they're questioning, what is the meaning of life? Why am I going through this? This is so hard. It can feel like a really hard time sometimes, depending on the circumstances. Deeper desires and attachments may be awakened or challenged in some manner. So, what are some examples? Now, I've had clients who, while Saturn was transiting their eighth house, there were many challenges working on alimony or shared custody of children and things of that nature, because we're talking about joint resources. I've had a few clients who manage other people's resources, such as people that work in the finance industry, and they're investors for other people. CPAs, accountants, they're managing other people's money. Often there's a talent for doing this. And also, I've met a surgeon here and there who has planets in the eighth house. Because if you think about death and rebirth, often surgeons are dealing with death or rebirth when they're doing these very risky surgeries on patients. So what are some other examples? I have a really interesting example. Many years ago, I was meeting with a woman who had a near-death experience, and she was in a very serious car accident. And when the EMTs found her, she was unconscious, but when she was awakened, she survived. They said, who took you out of this car? The car was, I guess, totaled. There was no one around. There was no witnesses, nothing. She basically said, I know someone took me out of the car. I felt them lift me up and take me out of the car before I passed out. Or, I can't remember the exact details, but it was fascinating. So at that time, she was convinced it was a loved one from the other side that helped her out of that car, because it's to this day, it's a mystery. I had another interesting client who had several planets in the sign of Cancer, which is very patriotic, home-loving, nurturing, in the eighth house. It's a male client who was he felt this past life connection to the Civil War. He ended up joining a group where they did Civil War reenactments, where he'd wear the uniforms and they would act out what was really happening in the Civil War. He was so connected to that era, and he was convinced, and I believe him honestly, that he had a life at that time. So if you believe in that stuff, it can be revealed in a client's birth chart as they discuss real life experiences. So the eighth house, personally, I was dealing with the aftermath of the death of my father. I recently just had Saturn. It's still in my eighth house. In whole sign houses, I have Pisces in the eighth house. So when it moves into Aries, technically in whole sign, it goes into my ninth house. And quadrant house systems, which I won't get into, but I have Saturn in my seventh house and my eighth house. But we're going to use whole sign houses for this, which starts at 0 degrees of each sign, depending on the time you were born, on the eastern horizon. So anyways, you want to look at your whole sign to see what house Saturn is transiting. So while Saturn's been through my eighth house, it's almost out of my eighth house. I've been dealing with the aftermath of many deaths in my family, and most recently my father. And the grief and the loss is real, and just some difficult experiences related to my health, and yes, I've been asking deeper questions about a lot of things in my life. It's been heavy, to say the least. It's I'm hoping it lightens up. So, moving on to the ninth house. The ninth house in astrology is also a very interesting house. It's the search for meaning, higher education, such as college or higher, academics, expansion of the mind, philosophy of life, religions, long journeys, travel, and more specifically, international travel. Also, legal matters can enter the ninth house, such as a lot of several lawyers I've met have ninth house planets in my for the years of practicing astrology. But those are the general keywords for the ninth house. So there's a deep focus. While Saturn is transiting the ninth house for a couple of years, there is a deep, serious focus and commitment to our ideals. We develop a structured approach to all these ninth house affairs, whether we're defining our belief system, whether we're teaching higher education, or working on a higher academic degree, or we're just going to school to study something for our own reasons, but we're serious about it. We're committing deeply in all areas of teaching, academics, publishing, expressing wisdom gained from the earlier cycles of Saturn through the birth chart. So teaching can come in here to the ninth house because all the knowledge and wisdom we've gained as Saturn's transited the previous houses, we're ready to start sharing that vision more. But more specifically, if we're working on a degree or studying or learning, we're getting ready for Saturn's transit to the 10th house cup, which is one of the four major angles in the birth chart. That is where we consolidate everything we've been studying, learning, all the wisdom gained, and we consolidate our life's ambitions or vocational career, or we may even retire as Saturn approaches the midheaven, which is the very top of the chart, the 10th house cusp. So some examples of ninth house. And by the way, ninth house also rules prophecy, is symbolized by prophecy. People with planets in the ninth house, and I have moon in the ninth house. I have been experiencing prophetic dreams off and on my entire life. I have clear cognizance where I just get downloads and I know things before they're going to happen. And I've been told this is coming from my ninth house. So, excuse me. So, the ninth house examples that I can give you are my own, as I said, prophecy speaking. I've had so many downloads and psychic premonitions in my life. It's impossible to share them all now, but I find it fascinating. I've had many clients they went off to college to get a second degree. They didn't like what they were doing. They decided to switch careers. They decided to pursue their PhD or another academic degree to prepare to change careers. I've had teachers really structure their classes. They're working really hard. Maybe they're getting very serious about helping students understand some kind of Saturnian subjects. There can be a serious focus on philosophy. So students of philosophy may become extremely studious of the many works of literature discussing all kinds of philosophical concepts. The individual's belief systems are often being restructured or redefined at this time. There can be an awakening and a thirst for knowledge of all of these different areas. Some examples of ninth house transits, Saturn going through the ninth houses. I had one client relocate to go to school in a foreign country. I had another client decide that she wanted to teach a foreign language in another country for 2 years. I met a client many years ago who published a book, and more often than not, I see the ninth house as really involving education. That is a real key word, education. Preparing for the threshold over the 10th house cusp. So the 10th house in the birth chart, when Saturn reaches the 10th house, this is a major milestone. So the key words for the 10th house in the birth chart are achievement in the world, authority, recognition, career or vocation consolidation, our public life. It's also part of the parental axis. The 4th house and the 10th house is the mother and the father. So sometimes we are dealing with responsibilities for our mother or our father or both. So I can't leave that out. So when Saturn transits the 10th house, there is definitely a serious consolidation of career ambitions. Authorities expressed in the wider world. Often people are recognized for their talents. They are given a raise, or they're promoted, or they're given more responsibility in their field. So all the studying that was done, or the degrees that were obtained in the ninth house, it doesn't even have to always be a college degree, but whatever, any area of learning is consolidated by the time Saturn reaches the top. So if someone was going to school to become a plumber, maybe they're opening their own business when Saturn approaches the midheaven, and they're starting their business and they're recognized, or they're recognized within their company. It could be anything. So people are usually working very hard. They feel fulfillment in their career ultimately. It brings reward and recognition. If individuals have been true to their authentic self in regards to their vocation, there should be fulfillment. If not, if there's been a denial of their true authentic self, there could be frustrations in career. There could be delays. There could be challenges to be overcome, because now Saturn is demanding that we redefine what we really desire to commit to vocationally in the wider world. And this is if we're working and we have a career. Some of us are retired, or individuals who've worked all their lives at this point may decide to retire, and they're recognized for their achievements, and they're ready to start a new chapter in their lives, and they feel a full sense of fulfillment that they've completed that phase of their life and they're ready for a new phase. So some examples: I've had several retirements. I've had people that have been promoted. I've had people that their workload increases tremendously, but they find it very fulfilling. I've had clients that become an expert authority in their chosen field, and they're very recognized and sought after for their knowledge. I've had individuals who have had to be seriously responsible for caring for an elderly parent while they're working in their career. So they're juggling a busy career and aging parents. And it's a very important time. If things haven't worked out when Saturn crosses this major angle, it is okay to say, I don't like what I'm doing. If at all possible, Saturn's asking you to be us to be authentic, to redefine and leave that career or vocation and go back to, change your vocation. A lot of people will get a different job at this time. They may be sought after by a headhunter because of their skills and talents in other areas. It really varies, but the main theme to remember is its consolidation of one's vocation. A personal example for me is when Saturn was transiting my ninth house, I was heavily studying astrology, like big time. And when Saturn approached my midheaven, I put my shingle out as a professional astrologer. And I saw a lot of clients back then, and I was, by word of mouth, I was gaining more recognition at the time. And I was 40 years old by the time I believe Saturn crossed my midheaven, and it was a really fulfilling time for me, vocationally. So let us move on to house 11. So as Saturn transits house 11 in the birth chart, keywords for house 11 are group involvement, social clubs, friendships, global awareness, long-term goals, collective endeavors, humanitarian ideals. Did I already say that? Basically, it's groups, friendships, sharing long-term visions with others. Usually by the time Saturn leaves the 10th house and moves into the 11th, the focus kind of comes off of just one's status in the career sector. It's now sharing with others all that we've learned and worked for during Saturn's transit of the last 10 houses. So the series focus moves away from career goals to more focus on personal goals or our individual purpose within the wider community. So we're taking a more structured approach in areas of group alliances and friendships. We're redefining our hopes and wishes and what role we want to play relating to the wider community. I've had clients cut off important long-term friendships at this time, leave groups that they did not feel aligned with their value system, or start their own groups that aligned with their value system and get really serious about and work hard to establish a group that reflected their personal long-term goals. I've had yoga teachers, clients start to lead retreats. Other healing arts professionals start to lead spiritual retreats, which involve group settings in the 11th house transit. Some individuals will get really serious about meeting new friends. Maybe they've been isolated, they've been working really hard, they've neglected their friendships, and so they get serious about, let me focus on reestablishing my bonds with my old friends, and social gatherings become more important, and going out more, socializing more, sharing oneself more with others. There could be more volunteering. I've had clients who decided to volunteer during this time. There can be increased use of social media to share one's vision, such as starting a YouTube channel and so forth. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of individuals start leading group retreats. Personally, when Saturn was transiting my 11th house, it was probably in the year 2003 and 2004. I taught astrology and tarot workshops during that time. It was right before I started not feeling well. That is before I got really sick with chronic Lyme disease, but that's for the next house for me to talk about. So, but I was sharing, all the work that I did, all the studying that I did to learn astrology, then all the work that I did in the 10th house, seeing clients, lots of clients at that time. Then I decided when Saturn transited my 11th house, well, I want to share what I've learned within a group. And so I did it for a period of time until I wasn't able to do it anymore. I did eventually go back to that a little bit, but circumstances in my life prevented me from really following through with that. But you get the drift of what Saturn's like going through the 11th house. Now, the 12th house. Wow, the 12th house, Saturn transiting the 12th house, I would have to say, is the most challenging transit of all. I've experienced it, and many of us have experienced it. It is not easy, but you will get through it. When you think about Saturn, Saturn is all about material reality and boundaries and structure. Well, the 12th house is not about any of that. The 12th house is about dissolving of the ego. It's about self-transcendence. It's about self-sacrifice. It's about retreat. It's about imagination. It's about cosmic consciousness. It's about oneness and the intangibles of life. So Saturn is like the structures of our life start to fall apart. It can be really, really stressful at this time because we're meant for things to dissolve because we are now preparing through these few years for Saturn to cross our first house cusp, which I mentioned in the last recording, which is all about redefining our identity. So all the transits since Saturn transited houses 1 through 11 are now consolidating in the 12th house. And what can we expect? Well, there's a variety of things. So keywords to think about again: retreat, isolation, seclusion, solitude, secrets. There is a serious focus on dissolving one's identity in preparation for the first house, as I mentioned. There could be health challenges. Outer circumstances somehow compel us to retreat and make sacrifices. There can be depression or sadness at the circumstances we are dealing with at this time. Often there are tests of karma or a balancing of karma if you believe in that philosophy or theory. The law of cause and effect. If we haven't been living our lives responsibly, or if we have not been taking care of ourselves, or if we've been dealing with addiction. The 12th house is when Saturn says, nope, time to face this addiction. If you're a workaholic and you've run yourself ragged, nope, you're going to have to go into retreat, and you're going to have to rest, and you're going to have to face this. The 12th house is the most mystical and spiritual house in astrology. It also symbolizes dreaming, hidden talents, imagination, hidden talents. Excuse me, I think I already said that. I ended up, when Saturn started transiting my 12th house, so my identity was totally wrapped up at that time, not only in raising my son, of course that was my priority, but I was teaching workshops. I was really working harder than I was pushing myself at that time. I didn't need to. I just liked it. I wanted to do it. I enjoyed it, but I really was pushing myself because I remember feeling really tired, but I would ignore it. And there came a time where I just stopped. I did not feel well, and I knew something was wrong. To make a long story short, while Saturn was entering my 12th house, and as soon as it entered that 12th house, I got really sick, like really sick with chronic Lyme disease. It took several months to get really diagnosed properly. For a time being, I was bedridden. I was for the 2.5 years period that Saturn was in my 12th house, I was isolated at home. I barely went out. I felt sorry for myself for the early part of the transit. I really did, because I was so upset that this was happening. But it forced me, in retrospect, to rest. It forced me to just, develop more a reverence for the intangibles of life, because I have Mars in the North Node and Leo in the 12th house. So North Node is our sole purpose in this destiny, not to digress, but with the North Node in the 12th house, I am not supposed to work. I am supposed to be working on my connection to a higher source, whether that be God, a higher consciousness, whatever you want to call it, faith in life. The 12th house is also about compassion. It's about helping others. It's about serving others without expectation of reward. It's also about, going within. All the things, the 12th house things like meditation or yoga or going on a retreat or just spending time alone in nature. There's so many variations, but I do all these things now, I have cultivated a sense of my identity, knowing that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. So towards the latter part of my illness, I came to the realization that, and certainly understanding astrology really helped me accept these circumstances. I think it would have been much harder to accept that I was so sick if I did not understand astrology at the time. So astrology can be a real helpful tool when you're struggling and you're going through a hard time. So you'll also read, if any of you are into astrology deeply, the ancients called the 12th house the house of secret enemies, whereas the 7th house can be the house of public enemies. Well, what does that mean? Well, often we can be our own worst enemy through addiction, or, because when Saturn's transiting the 12th house, dealing with reality and practical matters becomes very difficult, and addiction can take over because we want to escape. It's the house of escapism, too. A lot of addicts have 12th house planets. So, as I said, it's not necessarily, yes, people can have, private enemies at times, but more often than not, we become our own worst enemy. It depends on how we're dealing with what is happening. So what are some examples? I gave you my personal example. I had a client who went into rehab. She was ready to face a long-term addiction. She had an intervention within her family, and she really committed to her sobriety. And to this day, she still is sober. Because Saturn is all about commitment and focus and longevity. I've had a few clients who've had to sacrifice to help a very sick loved one. They had to move away to an isolated place, maybe help their parents or another loved one. And it was a lonely time for them. I've had a client who was volunteering in prison for free and working with inmates. She was really fascinating, interesting client. Because the 12th house rules all places that are hidden or behind the scenes. Prisons, monasteries, places of retreat. So yes, prisons are ruled by the 12th house, so I found that really interesting. So she really committed to helping these inmates, and it was really fulfilling for her. I had a client who was writing a book behind the scenes. She wanted to just retreat and have everybody leave her alone so she could just focus on writing this book. She rented a house in Nantucket in Massachusetts, like Cape Cod, and she wrote a book. The other thing I want to talk about, because this is really important, are pay attention to your dreams if Saturn is transiting your 12th house. And one universal common dream that I found out was a recurring dream where your teeth are falling out. I learned this after the fact. I had that dream consistently while Saturn was transiting my 12th house. And that dream, I believe, is about you feel like you're losing, the structure of your life is falling apart, which it was. This is a universal dream. So if you're having a recurring dream while Saturn's in your 12th house, look it up and study the meaning. It will help you understand what you are going through. Another interesting thing, I'm going to go back to myself to give you another interesting dream, is because the 12th house has to do with dreaming and Saturn's in there, and I think I kept a dream journal at that time. I was focused on writing down my dreams. And I had this dream where a black cat, I was sitting at a table with my mother and my aunt outside having a cup of tea, and this black cat came out of nowhere and scratched me really aggressively. And I woke up and I thought, what the heck was that about? And I wrote it down. Well, come to find out, a couple years later, one of the major co-infections I have with the chronic Lyme disease is cat scratch fever In other words, Bartonella. So my body was trying to tell me through a dream what was going on with me because I was wondering, what is this? Why do I feel so sick, even when I take medication? So that's a little interesting digression about dreams. And so when Saturn moves into the first house, which I talked about in the first recording, it feels like a weight has been lifted off of our shoulders. And that is what one can look forward to when Saturn leaves the 12th house. Hope you enjoyed this discussion, and I'd love to hear your feedback about Saturn transiting your own 12th. Today, I'm going to be talking about transiting Saturn, transiting houses 7 through 12 of the natal birth chart. There are 12 houses in a natal birth chart, and part 1 I discussed transiting